Hello, and welcome back to Conscious Caregiving with L&L, where we're tackling the tough conversations. Welcome back to Conscious Caregiving with L&L. I am your co-host, Lance A. Slatton, also the author of the All Home Care Matters Official Family Caregivers Guide, and I am joined by my esteemed colleague and friend, Lori La Bey. Welcome, Lori.
I'm excited to be here again, Lance. This is going to be a fun conversation. For those of you that don't know me, I am the founder of Alzheimer Speaks and the co-founder of Dementia Map and the author of Betty the Bald Chicken, Lessons in How to Care.
Yes, and it's a wonderful book for any situation you're dealing with. Children, adults, there's a lot of good lessons to learn from Betty the Bald Chicken, that's for sure. We're doing something a little bit different today where we're not going to have a panel joining us, but you and I are going to be talking a lot about denial. And, denial comes in a lot of forms, a lot of different situations. And why don't you kick us off, Lori?
Well, this to me is a really important topic. I hear families discussing this all the time, kind of pointing the fingers of why people aren't helping, why they're not on the same page. And it can be from the person diagnosed having maybe some health issues to family members and friends, as well as professionals. I mean, people have denial, all throughout life, but when it comes to a healthcare situation, it becomes, I think, a bit more critical because people are looking for support from one another. So I think first we have to define, what is denial? And to me, and I'd like your opinion on this too, it's just really a refusal to accept the reality in front of them. Their beliefs are different. And an example of this would be, and I'll use family as an example because this happens all the time. Mom and dad are fine. What are you talking about? I just visited. They're doing fine. They have no issues at all. And then the primary caregiver or care partner, maybe for those parents, are seeing all kinds of signs in terms of driving, taking medication, mobility. But when family comes and visit, they might just be sitting and reminiscing. And so they're not diving deep into motor skills and thought process and all of those types of things that happen. And so there's different reasons I think for denial, but denial is to me not wanting to explore that something might be off kilter.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, exploring it and acknowledging it and ultimately accepting it. With our line of work, we see several different forms of denial. Sometimes it's the elderly mom or the elderly parents who they're clinging on to that last bit of independence that they have. There's nothing wrong, the wife will say, with her husband's driving, but you see dents and dings and scrapes on the car because she's protecting him, so she's in denial. But then you have the children who will call because they're not able to maybe necessarily go over in person because they're out of state or their schedules. And they have a very superficial conversation. How is everything going? The mom, the dad, the parents, everything is fine. They don't dig below that surface. And sometimes they're in denial and they don't want to dig below that surface. We have many examples where oftentimes we're more intimately involved with the loved one because our staff might be there every day and the family can't. So they're getting everything, secondhand. And, we report to them, you really need to look into mom. She's not doing well. And I called and mom's doing okay. Well, but we're there and mom has a stack of overdue bills that she hasn't been paying. And an example I've mentioned many times over the years on this show is a lady we were helping had clear textbook example of dementia. And we kept telling the daughter, mom needs more help. And she's like, well, my brother handles that. Brother lives in another state. Brother calls, has a 5-minute conversation. Oh, I talked to mom. She's doing good. She must have just had a bad day. And then literally days later, the county is tacking up on her door that the property is going into foreclosure and it's going to go over to the county for lack of tax payments for 3 years. The family, the daughter, they were in denial. They either don't want to accept it or they're simply just ignorantly blissful, and everything's fine. And then they're thinking about how it's going to upend their routine. And the daughter, once it got to that point with this family, Her biggest concern was, I have no place for mom in my home. What am I going to do? They put her in assisted living. And we said, Mom's not a fit for assisted living. She thought she was. The facility told them she was. And then a week later, they're having to hire us to come in there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because mom ultimately wasn't a good fit. But the family was all in denial, and they didn't want to accept the fact that mom was not mom anymore like they, used to remember. And, that's hard. It's hard to come to terms with that.
Well, and I think sometimes it's, we're not used to having to double check, especially on our parents. What they've told me in the past has always been honest and truthful.
Right.
And you haven't had those issues. I know for myself with my parents who have both passed. My dad had brain cancer and died in 2001. My mom lived with dementia for 30 years and died in 2014. And I sold real estate for 25 years, and I worked with the senior market. So I would see this over and over and over again. And I had this kind of denial protection in my mind, which when I look back at it is hilarious, where I always thought my folks were going to be old in 10 years. And every year it was 10 more years, 10 more
Yeah.
years, 10 more years, because then I was in the safe zone and I didn't have to deal with what my clients were dealing with because my parents were healthy. And then boom, my dad gets brain cancer, my mom's got dementia, everything turns upside down. And there comes to a point where you can't deny it. But if you don't get major diagnoses like that, then it's real easy to just do those quick checks. Mom sounds fine. She says everything's okay, because you're not used to like digging into their finances, and many of them don't want you to.
Right.
And those are difficult conversations. So it's that whole, a lot of people say it's a role reversal that they're very uncomfortable with on where to step in. And I think to avoid denial, we need to have these conversations way before a crisis hits and say, if I need help, if things seem off, please check on me. I want your support with this because I may not know how to handle this. And you're right. There are a lot of seniors who see differences, who feel differences, but they don't want to lose their independence and they don't want to be a burden. So they keep things close to the belt. And a lot of times their kids will see things happening too, but they don't want to get in a fight because they know it's not going to be a pleasant conversation. And then on the other side, like you said, I don't have time or money or space or anything to deal with this. I don't know what the next steps would be. So they sit with their lips zipped, and then you and I end up dealing with them in a crisis situation. And that's so much what we want to avoid. And so, denial is tough, but I think it's something we have to explore because if we don't explore it, things aren't going to get better. And maybe you'll find out maybe it's medications that are making things wacky. Maybe it's a simple fix. Maybe they need meals on wheels or they're not sleeping, or there can be all kinds of different things that can throw people for, a physical and health loop that can be corrected easily. But you're never going to know that if you don't investigate that.
Right. And I think too, a lot of the roots that trace back to denial originate from fear, right? People might have an issue, they know it, and not necessarily dementia related. And the fear is preventing them from accepting, okay, I better go get that mammogram. I better go get that, colonoscopy, whatever it may be, because they're afraid of what the results might say. So they're in denial in that aspect. And, those fear is hard to overcome too. A lot of addictions, they say to really truly overcome an addiction, you have to acknowledge you have a problem. Well, it's not that much dissimilar when it comes to your health. You have to acknowledge that there is an issue before you can properly take care of that issue or address it.
Yep. And I think the fear, to me, it goes to the root of the cause because to me, the fear is the emotional side. And as a society, we don't deal with that very well. And we're supposed to be independent. We're supposed to be in control. And then there is also, that feeling, for the person, let's say, who's going to have a diagnosis, and is in a health crisis of who am I going to be now? How's that going to affect me? And even more importantly, how are other people going to treat me and look at me? Am I still going to be accepted? Because there's so many stigmas with so many different symptoms and health diseases out there, and diagnoses that just scare the bejesus out of people.
Right.
Like with dementia, a lot of people don't want to go in because the stigma is so strong. They see people pushing away, and they have a preconceived belief of how that disease is going to progress, which, as you and I know, we see this all the time. People are not always accurate in terms of their education and knowledge of what is possible and how to still live well. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about was, we don't really look at denial as a normal part of life. And I don't care if you're 2 years old or 102 years old, there are going to be times when you're just in denial.
Right.
And, it might be that you're not going to get the birthday present that you want or the birthday party that you want. And you're still going around telling everybody you're having the jumpy house and stuff. And I mean, it can be all kinds of different things where we're in denial and we're trying to preserve our self and our self-worth, in that process. And I think, the intensity of those moments can really vary too, depending on how we were brought up. Like I was brought up in a home where my mom was like, just, we're going to get in there, we're going to fix it, we're going to deal with whatever we have. And the men in our family were like, okay, yeah, we'll let her do that. That's kind of the girls' thing to do, but they didn't really get into the emotions
Right.
behind all that. They would be supportive, but they weren't really coming up with a plan. They would support the plan, but it was kind of at a distance in some ways, if that makes sense, from an emotional standpoint in many cases. And so, that makes a big difference. Did you grow up in a family that just never addressed issues? And it was just kind of a whisper in the back of the room of, this is wrong, something's off, but no one really said it out loud. That's a huge piece. And I think, but again, that's changeable.
Abs-
We're all in control of looking at that differently. Do you see denial as a normal part of life? I really do. I don't see much difference in
I,
circumstances.
I think, I don't know if I would say normal part of life, but I think I don't, it's almost, to me, it's almost like one of the emotions, in, because I think a lot of denial sometimes comes as a result of fear or the unknowing or the, uneducated. And I mean uneducated in the sense of, if you have a family, and their dad all of a sudden is starting to have memory issues and they know nothing about dementia, they don't know the signs to look for. So they might think, oh, dad's fine. He's just having an off week, or, maybe some milestone in life just approached or is coming up. And so he's a little off from his normal self. So I think that could be a sense of denial, but denial from being uneducated. And then I see denial in where it's used interchangeably from just lack of confidence, where, I coach several soccer teams, as you know, and sometimes, some of our younger players might get intimidated because they see the other team and the other team's a lot bigger, or they think they're faster, and they all of a sudden say, "Oh, we're not going to win. We don't stand a chance." To me, that's a form of denial. They're denying their ability to even compete before they even tried. Just because somebody's bigger doesn't mean they're better, doesn't mean they're faster, but they're seeing what they're seeing, and so that's their interpretation. So to me, that's another form of denial. But like, I feel like true denial, like in the textbook sense, could be that, but it's also, to me, when I think of denial, are, people with a health issue or family members that have a loved one with a health issue and they don't want to be accepting of what the reality is. So in that sense, I feel like it has become a part of their life where, and I'll get your opinion on this, people that are in denial that there's a problem, it's really hard to crack through that facade and to break through that barrier they've put up, getting them to accept or identify or even have some insight into what the reality is. So to me, that is a part of their life now. So at some point, I think it becomes a part of life, but I don't believe it's just a taken for granted everyday aspect of life.
See, and I say it's kind of a normal thing because I want people to understand that they go through this
Oh,
process
that sense,
probably
yeah, that it's
much.
normal to have that feeling.
Yes,
Yeah,
and that they've gone through this
yeah,
process many, many times, in many different situations, and they've dealt with it. But when it comes to health, now we're kind of in this life or death thing,
right,
especially when we're dealing with our seniors. We're looking at, oh gosh, this could really all be changing everything.
right,
And so instead of stepping in here, they step in way over here. And it's like, back up and let's get to where we're really at. But it's kind of like a sometimes with, and not everybody, but sometimes it's an all or nothing. They're either accepting and willing to look at what actually is before them, or they go to how much longer do they have. And there's a big difference there. And then also understanding doctors don't
right.
know what a prognosis is going to be. I mean, my mom was, given like 5 years and she lived 30 years with her dementia. My dad was given a year to a year and a half. He lived 4.5.
Well, and
Um,
one of our guests on seniors and driving, and I don't, if you feel comfortable saying his name, I didn't know if it would be all right. So I'll just say one of our guests, he was told he shouldn't drive anymore. And that was, I think, 13, 14 years ago. And he's still driving just fine.
oh yeah, that's Michael Ellenbogen, and he would be fine
Okay.
with that.
Yeah.
And there's so many situations like that. So it's I think part of it starts at the doctor's office, but a lot of this stuff has to start before the doctor's office
Right.
because we have to notice changes and we have to look at them seriously. And it's really easy to say, oh, it's just a senior moment, or they're getting older, that's part of aging. But you have to, in my opinion, almost kind of write some of this stuff down because it's really easy to forget when you are in denial. It's
Right.
not something that's on your mind. So it's like, been there, done that. No, we looked at that. It was all fine. And then it's like a one-time look. You think you wiped the slate, but you really don't with things
Well,
like.
and I would just add too, talking about Michael, sometimes denial is a good thing. And so in his case, he denied what the doctors were saying. You could say that was denial. And yet, if he didn't have that denial and he just went along with it, 13 years ago, he would have stopped driving. But he didn't believe that they were accurate and they were right, which they ended up not being. So now he's still living a pretty active, healthy life.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. And I think pushing those barriers are really important. I mean, I know that's something we're seeing in all of aging. It's like try. You don't know. They don't know. Every single person is going to react different. And some people have a real strong belief and they're just going to push through. That's who they've been all their life. That's typically not going to go away.
Right.
So keep them engaged. I also think it's interesting. I did a program on this and I asked people about denial and had they ever witnessed it. And when we talked, everybody basically went to the patient. They were the ones in denial, and they didn't want to accept that they were getting older. They didn't want to accept they had health, maybe restrictions that were coming into play, and all of those types of things. And then I said, well, have you experienced others? Well, then they started pointing to family members, especially if they were primary caregivers, that the other family members were in denial and they weren't stepping up to help.
Hmm.
And so their perception of not helping automatically said denial, correct or not. And in many, many cases it is. And in many cases it's just that person isn't capable or willing to help. It's not that they don't see what's going on, or they're not able to. But then when I asked the question, how many of you have been in denial? And the room just got silent because it's always easier to look at everyone else as the problem,
Right.
that you're trying to fix versus looking inward. And what happened when people started talking about their own denial, we kind of went deep and said, what did that look like? What did that feel like? Did you even know you were in denial? Because most people, I don't think, know they're in denial. They think their
Right.
perception is very accurate. And so then, during that conversation, commonalities came out and they started to look at people in denial differently once they remembered what it felt like for them. And, I think the biggest question that we ended up talking about was what broke you out of denial? And typically it was a major incident that they could no longer say this isn't an issue anymore. And it was typically a major health crisis that you couldn't ignore. And nobody wants to fall into that category. Do you see those differences, when you're talking with families in terms of denial of the patient or family caregiver or even the primary?
It's usually falls into two categories. It's denial because they're seeing and they don't want to believe what they're seeing and what they know. Then the other side, I call it the uneducated denial, where they're denying it, but it's because they're unaware, they're uneducated, they don't know what they don't know. And so, but once you explain things, once it's in black and white, once you point out differences, then there's like, oh my gosh, we had no idea. That's that group. But the other group is no matter what you're trying to do, like that lady, we told the daughter and son multitude of times, mom needs more help. She's not going to be able to continue staying in her home on her own. Get some more help, whatever you do, or if you can come by and help. The son couldn't, but the daughter lived locally, but she worked full time and was raising young kids. But I think too, sometimes it's just the person themselves. They don't want to accept it no matter what because it goes back to the fear aspect. They are afraid if they acknowledge they have dementia or they acknowledge that they're not able to safely go up and down the stairs to, take a shower or, do the laundry. If I acknowledge that, I can't continue living in my home. So they're going to hold on to that to the bitter end. And it's really to their own detriment. They don't understand if you acknowledge you need the help, then your children could bring in help like our company or another company or whatever they do so that you can continue living in your home safely as long as possible. But they think acknowledging that issue that they're having means they're gone, they're out the door. That's, so it's like either they're uneducated or no matter what you do or say, they're not going to let go of their belief, false belief that they don't need any help and they're just fine. And a lot of it originates from the fear of what the consequences will be if they acknowledge they need help.
Yeah. Well, and many times they've had friends where that's happened.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like the kids have taken over and they don't have any choice. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations ahead of time, even with doing your healthcare directives
Hmm.
ahead of time and what would happen. And there are some families that are all about the money
Yeah.
and they're going to cut corners to save that and they don't really care. And it's awful to say, but it's true.
True.
And there are others that'll bend over backwards and spend their own money, if mom and dad don't have it, or take them in or do whatever it takes to come up with a plan so that they feel safe and comfortable. But you have to know who are the people in your life that are going to really care for you. And you can't know that without having those conversations. So those are really, really important things to be able to discuss. And like you said, so many of them are easily fixable situations. And yeah, they might take a little bit of time, but again, you have to with any type of change, you have to get into a rhythm
Yeah.
of what's working and who can you pull in. Um, I think the other factor is we're not good at accepting help. We're good at giving help,
Mhm.
but we're not good at being on the receiving end because, one of the stigmas in the U.S., I believe, is that you are weak if you need help.
Sure.
And we've lost this sense of community where we're stronger together. And I think it's a beautiful thing to see that coming together and all ages being able to help, the kids included,
Mm.
with that. I think so often here in the US, we kind of push the kids out of it and go, well, we don't want to burden them, but yet it's a normal part of life to care for one another. Why would you cut that out? But we do that a lot, thinking that we're protecting them. And it's very confusing to the kids and very frustrating for them, especially as teenagers and young adults. Sometimes they're asked to step in, but they don't have the full picture.
Right.
And they have a lot of cool ideas, on how to be able to support and tap into technology. And, sometimes it's seeing the even just the communication go to the next level, within the family where maybe there's been a lot of social I can't say it.
Isolation.
Isolation. Thank you. My tongue is tripping here. Where there's been social isolation and they're not communicating all the time, and that increases. And when there's that type of engagement, that typically perks health up too. And from many different levels, from mood to actually physically getting better and doing more, maybe doing rehab that they weren't doing because what's the point? I'm not going to get out of here anyways. No one's going to come see me.
Well, and I know too, Lori, if the denial's not coming from the parent or the parent, it's typically coming from the spouse because they're protecting their husband or their wife. And I don't fault anybody for doing that. But then when you get to the children, and oftentimes it's adult children, we had a situation not that long ago where it was two sons, and dad had very, very advanced dementia. Mom was still at home. We were taking care of dad and a little bit of mom. And the one son is POA over healthcare. The other's POA over finances. And mom and dad had a wonderful long-term care insurance policy. So it's not costing the family anything to get whatever care mom and dad need. The one brother over finances didn't think mom and dad needed any help, no matter what the doctor said, no matter, and his brother's keeping him fully informed, and saying, look, the doctor says, dad cannot live alone and mom can't provide the care dad needs. Mom's an elderly woman and frail herself. And it came out later on, the reason the brother over finances would not add any more help for mom and dad, we were just going out there 2 days a week. There's 168 hours in the week. We were there a total of 8 hours, twice a week, 2 times for 4 hours for the whole week. That's not much at all. And the brother over healthcare ended up calling us and he's like, well, I'm taking over the finances. My brother got really upset. And these were very close brothers, but this is where their split came. The brother over finances went to the attorney, the family attorney, and tried to cash in the long-term care insurance policy because they had, I don't know what the exact number is. Let's say it was, a couple $100,000. He thought that he could go and cash that in and get the money. And the attorney said, long-term care insurance doesn't work that way. You can't cash it in for the value of the policy. It's not health insurance, The brother was so disgusted and so upset because he thought, what, I'm going to put this money in their pocket, and what's going to happen eventually, that's going to go in his brother's pocket. And the brother was in denial about the money and what it's going to take care of the parents. And he thought dad and mom were just fine, had all the medical information in the world, had the feedback and reports from our case managers and our staff, had the information from his neurologist, the geriatrician, and it didn't matter what was put in front of him, even his own eyes, he wouldn't believe it. So that denial, I don't know, that wasn't fear. What kind of denial would that be to you, Lori?
Well, to me, that's greed.
Yeah, it's
It's
denial
greed.
because of greed. Yeah.
And we do see that. And to me, that's not even denial. That's more abuse,
Yeah.
because it's deliberate, and it's not because they're looking at the best interest of the person they're supposed to be caring for. They're looking at their inheritance. And we see that
So
way more often than I know any of you listening want to hear, but it happens
yeah.
a lot. And, the money a senior has is their money. And, they've been stoken away, for a rainy day. And it's like, you got to look and say, it's raining.
Get your umbrella out.
Now's the time, to pull it out and support them so that they can continue to live a good life. But um and again, it could have been denial. To me, that scenario was it was too calculated for
Yeah.
denial.
Well, and the situations, just going back to the money, the one, I always have the greatest respect when you're dealing with the children of the person you're helping. And when it gets into the financial aspect of it, the ones that say, you know what, my mom and dad saved for this, they planned for this. This is their money. They earned it. I don't care. Whatever they need, we want them to have. That's the way it should be.
Yeah, and it's hard. I remember with my dad with his brain cancer, for he was really pretty good mentally and didn't have a lot of issues, but he still wanted to do their financing, with their financial planner. And I remember sitting with him, and he made a decision that wasn't really good, and we kind of went over it. And I spoke my piece, the financial planner did, and dad said, no, I still want this. And my brothers were really mad that I let him make that decision. And I said, it's still his money. It was a pride thing. It wasn't a huge investment that he was making, but it was extremely important to him in the moment. And my brothers were, like I said, not happy. You had power of attorney, you could have overridden it. And it's like, it's really still a fine line, that power of attorney, and how competent are they. And to me, I also had to look at not just their financials, but his mental well-being. And in that moment, that was really important to him mentally, to feel in control. And it's not like we were meeting with the financial planner, every other week. We would typically review like once a year. And it was like, we'll all live through this. And dad feels like he took a stand, and that was important for his pride, and for him feeling independent. And again, some of you listening might go, that was the wrong decision, Lori. And you can have that opinion. Wait till you go through it, because these aren't easy times,
Not at all. No.
and easy decisions. There are other situations. We had talked about driving, or hobbies, or can someone still cut the grass and use the riding lawnmower, or a chainsaw, or a gun. You run into safety issues sometimes with mechanical things. Or it could be driving a boat, or a pontoon. They're on the lake, and it's something they've always done, but is that really safe for not only them but for others at this point? Those reaction times. Sometimes it can be social participation. Can they still maneuver, especially if they have gait issues, or if they're exhausted, or maybe their senses are off, their eyesight's not as good. There's just so many different ways that we can adapt to still make things work. Even like with the holidays, sometimes it's just too many people, and it's not comfortable maybe for your senior anymore. Does it make any difference if they have COPD or cancer or dementia, or whatever it might be? What's going to be best for their experience? And a lot of times with families, that's a huge denial issue, because we've always done it this way. These are our holidays, this is our tradition. And yet, if you're really caring for someone else, you have to take their comfort level in, in my opinion, into
Right.
consideration. And maybe, you know with our family, we started doing things a little bit different. We started having smaller but more events. or my mom or dad didn't last as long as they used to, and so we made it comfortable for them to be able to leave, or if it was at my house they could go rest, and nothing was said. It was just we all knew that, and we set that up ahead of time so that they were comfortable with that. Acknowledging those things, I think, are really important to everyone's well-being. Otherwise, everyone's kind of stepping on, um, the pine cones, as they're
Right.
walking around, and it's you can almost feel the crunching of the tension of what's going to happen, and how's it going to unfold, and is somebody going to explode? And it might not be the person who's sick, it might be someone else who just gets really frustrated at others, the way they're treating them, and having those conversations of being on the same page, and really having a care plan within a family. um, we've talked a lot about different types of examples. One of the things though that we didn't hit on, and I'm still a firm believer in this, is we've talked about the senior, we've talked about family members, but we haven't really talked about friends,
Right.
and how that can impact people. Have you seen friends in denial and how that impacts an individual?
Yeah, I've seen it both ways. I've seen friends who are trying to convince the friend, "Hey, there is something wrong here," and to trying to reverse the denial of their friend. And then I've seen the other side where their friends that they've been with for years don't want to accept that they can't hang out anymore. They can't go to the movies together or dinner, and they block that person out of their life because they think they're just making up excuses to get out of hanging out or spending time together. So I told this one lady, we've had several examples that I've mentioned over the years on the show, but another one where it was just her and her girlfriend, and they were both single, both divorced, and they just ended up going out on Fridays, going to the movies over the weekend. And this woman was going through really intensive chemo and radiation, and her friend just could not accept or understand why she couldn't still go out to dinners and movies. And she said, because I'm always nauseous, I want to lay down, I have no strength, I've lost all my hair, and I don't want to wear a wig. I mean, and the friend's like, you're not that sick. It's like, so I mean, there's kind of both sides of that coin, where I think it's just, again, it goes back to, acceptance and just understanding what either you're going through, if you're the one in denial, or doing the best to either advocate for yourself or have somebody you trust share with others what you're going through. And hopefully they've never had to go through it, but so they can get a little semblance of what it is you're having to deal with. So hopefully they become accepting and they're not denying what you're trying to share with them.
Well, and I think in that example too, chances are the person was kind of jumping from this stage to the next stage. And so every time they were with that person, they were thinking about their death,
Yeah.
and then that's just too much. I can't
Right.
I can't deal with that emotion. So then they're like, nope, okay, I'm out of here, and I'm gonna blame you because I can't take the responsibility of looking at the big picture right now. And I think it's just so important, and I think it's so healthy for people to share their true emotions with one another. I mean, even though you can't fix a cancer diagnosis, you can let somebody know that you're going to support them, and that's going to mean a lot,
Yeah.
to them, that they can be honest with you and share their feelings. I mean, think about it. If that was you, and how sick you were feeling, and you felt like you had to put on a Stepford Wives smile all the time and step up to the plate to make sure they were okay when you're the one that's sick. But we see that a lot.
Yeah.
People are still caring for others, and a lot of times that's their natural role in life, and that's the way their friendships have intertwined, because the person who might be ill is really the primary carer of that, if it's a family member, friend, whoever. But that's just who they are at their core. But that's not healthy for them, because now they're diverting their energy from healing themselves to making you feel comfortable. And and doing, spending energy that isn't really helping them get
Right.
well and might be causing them extra stress in the process, trying to make sure that you're okay. Um, there's also groups like church, and I'll give an example of it happens to be a dementia example, but where people really think they're being supportive. So there was this one church, and they were all excited because they started a memory cafe, but their memory cafe was in the basement, so no one would know,
Mm.
and so they were doing something really good, but they wanted to hide it from the rest of the congregation so that nobody was embarrassed, instead of saying, hey, this is a cool thing we're doing to support people with dementia. Because when you put them in the basement, now they know they're hidden, and it's really not talked about, and that people are looking down at that whole situation. Intent was really, really good, but not looking at the big picture effect, of their messaging and stuff. And I see those types of things happen way more often than we think, because we're kind of putting a band-aid on it, versus looking at a whole thing. There could be examples of professionals too that might be in denial, and professionals could be anything from a doctor and a social worker I've seen in denial, to going to the bank where someone's pulling money out more often than they used to, or having trouble writing checks, or not paying their bills, and that all they're getting late fees, or things of that nature. Or even in a beauty shop, people might not understand what's going on, or they might have a reaction, especially if they're on chemo, to a perm, and the smell
Right.
of a perm could make them really nauseous, and not understanding why that is anymore, and trying to kind of fluff over it. I think the ones that really I have a tough time is when I see the doctors and the nurses and some of the staff denying what's really right before them, because and I don't know if it's because they're uncomfortable. I don't know if it's lack of education. Um, but that's a tough pill for me to swallow. And I see that a lot of times when, and I hear from families when people are getting a diagnosis, how uncomfortable maybe the doctor is, because there's not a lot of choice to support, or they don't know, they're not aware of like a lot of the social support that is out there that you and I might know,
Right.
but they're not tapping in to somebody like that to help those people. And it really screws up the messaging on many levels to the patient and to their family. And I think it leaves the doctors and the nurses feeling really guilty as well. So I don't think it's healthy, um, for any one industry to think they're the end all be all answer,
Right.
when it comes to these situations. Have you experienced that with professionals in the healthcare field?
Oh,
Even in general?
absolutely. And I think it goes back. And I was thinking about our friend Pete Hill as you were talking. He has the podcast, The D Word. The reason it's called The D Word is healthcare professionals and people don't want to use the word dementia, because our healthcare professionals, they're meant to cure and fix things. And dementia, you can't really cure and fix. It's kind of like how cancer was 20, 30 years ago. It was the C word. I still hear elderly people refer to cancer as the C word because that's what it was, as, during their time. But yeah, I mean, talking about, hospice and having to come in and talk about, well, you know, the reason you've been sick is your body's riddled with cancer throughout. They tend to stay away from those things, and they tend not to want to address them. And it goes back to, our healthcare professionals should be the most trusted and the most reliable source of information, prognosis, diagnosis. But oftentimes families are left scratching their heads. I'm going to use our friend Michael again. I don't know the exact number. You know him better than I, but he had how many misdiagnoses of dementia? All these different doctors, and he can't get an accurate diagnosis. I mean, that's not what we come to expect with healthcare professionals. Is that they were just giving him a diagnosis because they didn't know what else to do, or or they really didn't know, but they needed to give him something. It's just there's a lack of support and reliability that I'm hearing more and more of all the time when it comes to nursing homes, long-term care rehabs, and hospitals. And it's very, very disturbing, because they're the ones that do have really the ticket. You can't get a treatment, you can't get a prescription, you can't get a test unless it comes from your doctor. But if they're in denial and not aware, or whatever their reasonings are, that could prolong your chances of survival, or of getting cured, of getting fixed. It's very disturbing and very troubling.
Yeah. I just had a recent situation with a family member who was in the hospital, and they were looking at discharging. And, again, folks, you got to advocate for your peeps big time. And it was absolutely ridiculous. He's on oxygen, he's not on oxygen, he's on a catheter, he's not on a catheter, his blood pressure's low, his blood pressure's fine. He's getting rehab. No, he's not. You're standing him up next to his bed, and he's walking 5 steps in place. And you're going to send him home? Are you crazy?
Right.
And they're like, no, he's fine. And I was actually told, if they can respond, if they can talk to me, then I can give them all their discharge stuff. They can make decisions if they're going to go home or into long-term care. And I'm like, that is so inappropriate. It's not even funny, because people will say what they want, what they know you want to hear,
What you want to hear, right?
where they want to go. And I was just absolutely livid, just livid. And there were a lot of staff that were really great. And when I would call in or stop in and talk with them, they were like, no, those are great points. No, there's no way he can go home yet. Absolutely not. And I'm like, well, that needs to be in the chart, or even the do not resuscitate interpretation, the doctor's interpretation versus what the paper said was totally different. Well, no, we'll still do that. I'm like, that's not what this checkbox says. We probably won't have time to call. And then come to find out, we even did the paperwork there, had it notarized, and it's not in the hospital file. And so there's just all of these things that are pieces of inefficiency, but also denial by the workers themselves in many different capacities. I did want to highlight, when you were talking about the doctors in wanting to be able to fix it. And I'll use the example of Michael and all of his different diagnoses. And this is becoming very common. They just have to start telling people this is a baby disease, and we don't really know enough about it. But at this point, I think this is what it's going to be. But it could change, or you could have multiples. But on most situations, if it's dementia, if it's cancer, they're not having those conversations. They're not talking about quality of life. They're just talking about pushing pills a lot of times in treatments. And I take a huge offense with that.
Right.
And maybe I'm in denial of what our healthcare system is. And now that I'm 65 and getting older, and realizing, hey, I could be in that bed any day. And in this system, maybe I've been in denial thinking everything's peachy, but it does seem like it's significantly changed since COVID, a lot in terms of staffing and practices. And it seems to be much more financially pushed in terms of how things are done. And so, I kind of have to look at myself going, I don't want to be in denial about this and the process. So it can be, denial cannot just be about a person in a disease. It can be about the process and the possibilities
Absolutely.
as well.
Absolutely. I just want to touch on that again, though. You're the only ones that are going to be able to advocate for your loved one, or maybe your loved one's going to advocate for themselves, and that's wonderful. but you need to be there as a support advocate, because it's easy to get overwhelmed if you have, a bed full of, nurses and doctors telling you what they want to do and what they're going to do. You can speak up, but you need to be there to help support them in advocating for what their wishes are, because it's very easy to get kind of lost in that, whole matrix when you're sitting in a hospital room or in a hospital bed, and somebody in a white coat is saying, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, this is what you need, this is what's going on. And if you don't agree with that, or you don't feel it's right, speak up, because no one else is going to do it for you.
Yeah. Well, and you have to double check too. I mean, even with my family member who was in the hospital and they're talking about discharging him, I'm like, he's still on oxygen at 3 liters. Oh yeah, oh yeah, we should probably turn that down. See how he does.
Yeah.
That didn't come to you. The doctor didn't. I mean, it's just like, he's got to get off the catheter. He's got to get off these things. And I was like shocked that I was like the watchdog of, oh yeah, that's right. you know, and
Well,
I
then,
actually,
then your head
I,
probably goes to what would have happened if I wasn't there being the watchdog.
yeah, yeah. Well, I know my dad would have died
Yeah,
because,
it's terrifying.
yeah, because the doctor had taken him off his, it was a medication to help reduce the swelling of his brain.
Mm.
And we just saw him just go gaunt and become nothing in just a couple of hours. And the nurse is like, he's fine, he's fine. I'm like, no, he's not fine. And so I called for the patient advocate and got a second opinion. And the doctor's like, oh my God, he took him off this medication. That never should have happened. Gave him a shot. And in 20 minutes, he was back sitting up in bed watching the ball game, interacting with us.
Mm.
But the doctor said he would have been gone.
Wow.
So mistakes happen. And sometimes, they're straight mistakes and sometimes there's bad judgment. But, know that if you're having issues, you can go to the patient advocate in a clinic or a hospital.
Right.
And, if they're not there, someone has to be on call and we'll get back to you and follow up. And they take that pretty seriously, I have found. And, you can go further, by reporting them to the state as well. And again, nobody wants to do that. It takes a lot of energy, to do that. But sometimes that's what you have to do, to not only protect your loved one, but others that follow as well with
Absolutely.
that. I'd like to get into just kind of in wrapping up, we talked about doctors, but attorneys, accountants, and financial management managers, I find, sometimes are in denial because they don't want to lose a client, maybe that isn't mentally capable anymore. And that's kind of a fine line with all of those things. So again, it's important to have your powers of attorney and your healthcare directives, and get that stuff in place way before you're thinking someone's going to die. That's just smart living, because any of us could get into a car accident or whatever, at any time of life. But I kind of want to wrap up with some strategies for denial. So, what do you think? I mean, I think stigma causes a lot of denial, because it scares us. What would you recommend to kind of get over stigmas?
My big thing is educate yourself. Educate yourself, learn about it, because sometimes, it's the monster under the bed. You have, and that could be with really anything in life. You have this big fear of X, Y, or Z, but when it comes to your health or different things and stigmas, usually the fear is a lot worse than the reality. And once you come to understand it better, know about it, and accept it, then I think that stigma kind of gets erased. But what we need to do, like what you're doing and I'm doing and others in our industry, is we're trying to raise awareness and educate people to help erase those stigmas.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think education isn't always formal. It might be in
Right.
a support group or a gathering. It might be in a Facebook group of others going through this. We can learn so much from one another.
Right.
What about grief? Because grief, puts us in that whole denial thing too. If we don't want to go there, we don't want to process that. Um, any tips on dealing with grief?
So I look at grief, two different types of grief. There's a anticipatory grief where when you have a loved one and you have accepted or you eventually accepted that they're going to pass, maybe they have progressive dementia or maybe it's just a, beginning of dementia. You're already starting to anticipate the day they're not going to be here anymore. You're kind of losing that person twice. You're losing who they are while they're still here, and then you lose them when they do pass. And then you have the grief for after they pass. And I don't think there's a right or wrong. Everybody grieves differently. There's no right or wrong. And I'm not trying to say one's worse than the other. I know for me, I find anticipatory grief with the families we work with ends up being harder than the grief after they pass, because you're waking up. They tell me this is how it is for them. They wake up every day and they go to bed every day, always anticipating, is tonight the night? Is tomorrow the day? Because there's really no timeline definition on when somebody's going to pass. And like you said, doctors don't know, hospice doesn't know. And get into a support group or do one-on-one counseling. If a group is not your thing, talk to somebody one-on-one. It could be your pastor, your priest, your rabbi. It could be, a counselor, like a therapist, or it could just be your close friend that, understands what you're going through. Just get that off of your chest as often as possible, because building it up and just keeping it internally can wreak some serious havoc on your own health and your mental well-being.
I think that's really good advice. And, grief is really about emotion. And, how do you process that? I just interviewed Deborah Schaus on my show, and she has written a book. What's it called? Letters from the Ungrateful Dead.
Mm,
And she was really struggling with the loss of her daughter. And she went to a therapist, and the therapist said, write letters to her and then sit quietly and let her respond to you. And so her book is these letters that she wrote to her daughter and then these responses that she got. And they were so healing and just so beautiful. And their both personalities came out and humor and stuff. But it's pretty incredible. There's different ways to be able to release those emotions. If you're not one that wants to cry, maybe you can write things down. Maybe you don't ever, maybe you don't ever want to share it with anybody. That's okay. But again, it's that acknowledgement of what is scaring
yeah.
you. And, with grief, again, for me, one of my tricks that I used was realizing how lucky am I to hurt this bad because I love so deeply.
Yeah.
And that
Wonderful.
and
Yeah.
that really helped me pull out of that. Other things are like sometimes there's embarrassment with a disease or, extra tasks that people have to do. How do you suggest that they deal with those two variables?
Yeah. Well, the embarrassment one, I would say turn your embarrassment into being proud. And that might sound strange to people, but I think of Michael and all the incredible, incredible work and advocacy he's doing. I think of Norms, in Purple Angel. He took an embarrassing situation in a store where he was kind of shunned. He walked out of the store and he developed Purple Angel, and for viewers and listeners that may not know, it's in 64 some countries now. And it's all about raising awareness and helping those and their families living with dementia. So he took that experience and turned it into so much good, and he's still working and, advocating to this day. I think of, Jennifer Butte, former doctor in the UK, well-known doctor. She has Glorious Opportunity is the name of her organization. And again, you can take a situation and turn it around, make a bad situation a good situation. And a lot of people get their joy and their purpose out of advocating and helping. And it could be any illness, any disease, any situation. And tackling, additional tasks. I think to me, it seems simple, but sometimes it's hard. We always have people say, let me know if you need help. And then you reach out to them and they're not able to help. But when you have people offer help, I say when you can, just make down a little cheat sheet of things you need help with. Maybe it's getting an oil change, picking up groceries, whatever it may be. And then when somebody says, oh, if you ever need help, let me know. You can let them know right then if you're able. And then let them decide if they're going to help or not. But delegate, ask for help, speak up if you need it. Don't try to undertake all of this on your own because you're already going through enough as it is.
Yeah, because you are taking on extra things. So it might be a neighbor cutting your grass or shoveling your snow. And, realize that people feel good when they help. And so by telling them you don't need help makes them feel bad.
Right.
It makes them feel pushed away, and you need your community around you. What about emotional unavailability? Because there's a lot of people that just aren't emotionally available. Any strategies for dealing with someone like that?
Yeah, just don't take it personal. Try to understand at least what they're experiencing and what they're going through. And they quite often could be going through things none of us will ever be aware of because they don't want to share that because it is so difficult, and they may not know how to come to terms with it or how to express it, and they might express it by just kind of being almost cold, if you will. Don't take those things personally. Just give them a hug or send them a text or a note. Just say, you know what, I'm here if you ever want to talk, or I'm here for you if you need me.
Yeah, and a lot of emotional unavailability can be really deeply rooted in their own family and upbringing. And again, it's usually because they're scared,
Yeah.
of feeling those feelings. And so, to me, all of what we're talking about today is trying to come up with a comfortable place for things. Last two things I just wanted to talk about was change in physical appearance, because a lot of times with disease, physical appearance can change, and then change in abilities. What would you recommend? How would you recommend people approach those two things?
Change in physical appearance, I would just be very cautious on what you say. If the person maybe lost a bunch of weight, it might not have been intentional. It could have been through treatments they're going through or whatever. I would only mention it if they mention it, because you don't want to accidentally, unintentionally say something that might be insulting, or they might take offense to. But as far as abilities, I think it kind of falls under the asking for help part. If they can't take the laundry upstairs, ask them, hey, would you like me to run that upstairs for you? I got to go up there and use the restroom anyways. Don't make it solely just that situation or that task, but find a way to kind of slide that task in there so it doesn't seem obvious, because they might get offended or embarrassed. But just understand that they're going through changes, and they might not be the same. They may not look the same as they used to, or they might not be able to do the same things as they've always done. And just be there as a support person for them. Don't worry about having the right thing to say. Just letting them know you're there anytime is going to go much farther than you worrying about saying the right thing or the wrong thing.
Yeah. I would just add to the abilities thing is to be careful to not overdo. So
Right.
don't bring it up and put it away. Bring it up so that they can still, if it's folding or putting away, but know their abilities, because that can really strip somebody of dignity. And
Absolutely.
I didn't know that until when my dad was sick. We were going on a trip, and I packed, their suitcases for this cruise we were all going on. And I went to go pull it, to the car. My dad was with me, and they were too heavy for him to pull. He was in a weakened state, and I hoisted him in the trunk and blah, 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 blah. And I thought, dang it, Laura, you could have packed a smaller bag for him to carry.
Yeah.
Didn't even cross my mind until I saw his face and just how sad he was. So think about some of those things. And then, when appearance changes, sometimes it can be grooming. And I'll use my mom as an example, where she didn't want to do a perm anymore because she couldn't sit in the chair, and she didn't like the smell, and the rollers were too tight. I mean, there was a bazillion different things. And so it was just very irritating for her. And she didn't brush her teeth anymore because she didn't understand what a toothbrush was. So,
Mhm.
her teeth looked like a rusted chainsaw with fried rice hanging off them. And we tried the swabs, and we tried the mouthwashes, but none of that stuff worked for her. And she didn't wear makeup. That wasn't important. She didn't have her nails done because she didn't want to sit, and she was starting to shake a little bit, and it was more difficult. I think we need to explain to people that just because they look different doesn't mean they can't have a joyful, engage life. And I
Absolutely.
think that's a huge missed opportunity with that. So thank you for having this conversation with
Yeah,
me. I think it is such an important one, and hopefully our listeners find some tidbits in this to help them in the future deal with disease and being able to recognize denial and how they can adjust that or maybe help somebody else as well.
absolutely. Always great to see you, Lori.
Well, thank you very much, and until next time.
Until next time, have a great day.
Bye now.
Thank you for joining us again here this month at Conscious Caregiving with L&L, where we're tackling the tough conversations. We look forward to seeing you again here next month.